What's your biggest fault?
My biggest fault. My biggest fault. Wow, that's a tough one. Let's see. Biggest fault. I guess it would have to be that sometimes I'm so cool that it makes other kids feel bad.
Maybe an offer. Not really for intellectual pursuit, but just for laughter, really. Pick some kind of subject in science. Don't pick all of them, because I fully realize that you are too stupid to realize that cosmology is a different field of science from biology. But try to get those two little brain cells you have and try, work them extra hard and try to pick one subject in science that you disagree with. Make a short little video about it, and I'll crush you.
But we now know that the cell is extremely complex, even in comparison to our technological marvels. The Boeing 747 has 5 million moving parts approximately, but the cell itself has billions of parts. It's a tremendously complex thing. This is actually a picture of what we call a eukaryotic cell, which is different from a bacterial cell, which is prokaryote. Prokaryote means before nucleus, and the eukaryote means it has a true nucleus. The nucleus is one of these little organelles. These cells have little organelles, like we have an organ in our body, like the hearts and lungs and things. Cells have these little organelles. They have little compartmentalized processing centers. One of them holds the DNA, that's the nucleus right there. There are other organelles, we'll talk about some of these. The mitochondria is the organelle right there that makes energy for the cell. We'll talk about some of those energy processes. The Golgi involved with processing and packaging cellular products. Other things like microtubules are used for structural support and to make things like these little cilia come out here. We'll talk about those some, but cells have all these little organelles. It's a tremendously complex thing. To grasp the reality of life as it has now been revealed by molecular biology, we must magnify a cell 1,000 million times until it is 20 kilometers in diameter and resembles a giant airship, large enough to cover a great city like London or New York. What we would then see would be an object of unparalleled complexity and adaptive design. If we were to enter, we would find ourselves in a world of supreme technology and bewildering complexity. We would see endless, highly organized corridors and conduits branching in every direction. These are these corridors, these conduits that make up what's called the cytoskeleton, involved with transport of molecules. Branching in every direction away from the perimeter of the cell, some leading to the central memory bank in the nucleus and others to assembly plants and processing units. A huge range of products and raw materials would shed along all of the manifold conduits in a highly ordered fashion to and from all the various assembly plants in the outer regions of the cell. This is a transport protein shuttling a vesicle along what's called a microtubule. We would see all around us in every direction robot-like machines. We would notice that the simplest of the functional components of the cell, the protein molecules, were astonishing complex pieces of molecular machinery. We would wonder even more as we watched the strangely purposeful activities of these weird molecules, particularly when we realized that despite our accumulated knowledge of physics and chemistry, the task of designing one such molecular machine, that is one single functional protein molecule, would be completely beyond our capacity at present. What we would be witnessing would be an object resembling an immense automated factory, a factory larger than a city and carrying out almost as many unique functions as all the manufacturing activities of man on Earth. However, it would be a factory which would have one capacity not equaled in any of our more complex machines, for it would be capable of replicating its entire structure within a few hours. The cell is complex beyond our imaginations, and truly at this point, we still don't understand most of what is going on inside the cell. Advances in biology, in particular molecular biology, biochemistry, microbiology, have illustrated a world that no one ever knew of before. As Howard said, I worked in biotechnology for about 10 years. You might recognize me in the back there before I turned into Shrek, right there. But these new disciplines in biology have illustrated a world that no one ever knew of before. A world of remarkable beauty, of symmetry, just an amazing world there that no one ever knew existed before.
We can work out if we had a pinhead of DNA, in theory we could write the information of these books on DNA. But it turns out a pinhead 2 millimeters in diameter, spherical pinhead, would be the equivalent of a pile of paperback books reaching from here to the sun. Just about, or 500 times from here to the moon. That's paperback books I could store on just one pinhead of DNA. Or to put it another way, see, 1,600 kilometer high pile of CDs. You know, a CD can store the entire set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, but a 1,600 kilometer high pile of CDs would be required to store what could be stored in just a single pinhead of DNA. The other way of putting it is a 40 gigabyte hard drive is not a bad hard drive, I've been told, but in fact a pinhead of DNA is 100 million times better. So you think our multi-gigabyte hard drive is something special. Well, God's information technology just leaves it in the dust.
More recent advances in microscopy have illustrated something even more magnificent, and I love these images from electron microscopes, of which there are more than one kind. There's a scanning electron microscope and a transmission electron microscope. The scanning electron microscope gives us these images that show the three-dimensional surface of objects. This is a single-cell organism called a diatom. But these microscopes really do illustrate the symmetry and the workmanship that is in the cell. Single-cell organisms. The workmanship, huh? Some of these images really do illustrate just how worldviews affect your interpretation. Forgive me for walking in front of the projector. How can someone see this and not realize that it's a construct, that someone made this? How blind must you be by your worldview, right?
Goes on to say that they knew God but did not glorify Him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. That's pretty strong language, but it really gets the message across that atheists are futile in their thinking, and I think chemical evolutionary theories are the epitome of futileness. But here's an example of the bias that you get from the people researching evolution. See, a Kansas University professor, he said, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from the science because it's not naturalistic. He's saying no matter what evidence he has, he's not going to believe in a designer because he's already excluded it without even looking at the evidence. He's already made up his mind there's no such thing as a designer because it's not scientific. And that's the exact opposite from what Paul says. And another scientist who is somewhat skeptical of the origin of life ideas, an information theorist called Hubert Yockey. He's not a creationist, but he said research on the origin of life is unique in that the conclusion's already been authoritatively accepted. And all we have to do is find out the scenarios and the mechanisms by which it happens. See, they've already made up their mind that life came from non-living chemicals. Before even looking at the evidence, all they're trying to do is try to find the chemical evidence to back up their belief system. But their conclusion's already there, that life somehow or other came from non-living chemicals. And Yockey himself said that contrary to the established and current wisdom, a scenario describing the genesis of life on Earth by chance and natural causes that can be accepted on the basis of fact and not faith has yet to be written. Now he wrote that 25 years ago, but he hasn't changed his opinion since. He is still of the opinion that there's no good theory of the origin of life from non-living chemicals. Therefore, this idea is accepted by a blind faith and not by real evidence. Now it's interesting because the evolutionists want to say that we're the ones who have blind faith and they're the ones who go by evidence, but in fact the opposite is true. Because it's very important to understand whenever you read an origin of life paper, they've already assumed that chemical evolution has happened. Well, it must have happened because we're here, aren't we? So you get the idea there, we're here, therefore evolution must have happened to get us here. But how do we actually understand if something's been designed? I'd say that the living things shout that they've been designed. It's so obvious. But the thing is, we're made in the image of God, and part of our image of God is our creativity, and we make things. Now, how do we tell if something's been made? Well, for one thing, we look at this jet fighter here, and one thing about the jet fighter, it has oodles of correct components. The point is, a wing won't fly by itself, and neither will a tailplane fly by itself, and the cockpit won't fly by itself, and the jet engine won't fly by itself. The point about this is that the components have to be organised correctly. So not only do you have to have the correct components, but they must be organised correctly. And as we can do a proper scientific experiment, you know, science is about things which are repeatable and observable in the present. Like if I tell you that water boils at 100 degrees, you don't have to take me on faith, do you? You just go and test it yourself. But the idea that, say, a reptile turned into a bird 150 million years ago, well, I don't know how you're going to test that. Go back in time in the TARDIS or Star Trek Enterprise.